So have you noticed how often when you walk around the city, people are moving like this? In China, there are in fact already pedestrian streets which are just lanes for mobile phone users. It's time to look up. When was the last time you stood on a city street and asked, what makes a city? This was a question I asked myself as I stood on this street corner. It's Lexington Avenue and 53rd Street in East Midtown Manhattan. It was a couple of years ago. It was one of the hottest days of the year. A couple of days beforehand, I had answered an advert from the Danish architect, Jan Gehl. Gehl had become famous for transforming Times Square, which was once a congested traffic jam, and turning it into a pedestrianized public space. And he had been invited to do the same in this rather down-at-heel quarter of Manhattan. And so there I stood on that street corner. I had a file, I had a pencil, and I had a counter. And what I was being asked to do was just to watch and measure people as they used this ordinary part of the city. And so right at the very beginning of the day, I watched people as they ran from the subway to their office door. I then, as it got warmer, and as the pace of life got slightly quieter, I watched as delivery boys ran in and out of the traffic. I watched people come and go. And what I realized as I was standing on that street corner and counting the people is that really the question was not what makes a city, but who makes a city. And perhaps even more important and more radical than that, who is the city for? And so there are so many stories that we hear about what the future of the city will be. For many, the future of the city is an economic story, that the profit of the city, the idea of the city as an economic powerhouse is absolutely at the forefront, and that we should measure the success of the city by its productivity. But a profitable city is not necessarily a good city. We're also hearing a huge amount about the value that technology will bring to our future city, the way that smart cities and smart grids, that the Internet of Things will transform not just the fabric, but our everyday lives. In this way, the fabric of the city has been wired with sensors and monitors which will allow us to harvest huge amounts of big data. We'll then be able to use this big data in order to form some kind of predictive analytics that will help us make better decision making. Now, I find this technological vision of the future a compelling one, but I think there's also a problem here, because technology does not make a city. We make a city. And as a result, what I want to talk about is not economics or technology, but a social urbanism, an idea of the city in which people are right at the heart of everything that the city does and every decision that is made about the city. It is about building the city around the people rather than building the city and then try to cram people into it. But in order to understand this social urbanism, we really need to go back to the street corner. And where I want to start is another street corner in Manhattan. In 1969, the American journalist Holly White was offered a job by the New York Planning Department. What he discovered when he went there was that despite the fact that this office had spent millions on transforming the fabric of the city, they'd never gone back to see the impact that their work had done. And so Holly White decided to hire a group of students from the local Hunter College, and he placed them at strategic points around the city and just asked them to measure and count and watch what happened on these street corners. Now, this is one of the most famous examples of this experiment. It's the corner outside Saks Fifth Avenue, one of the major department stores in the city. And what you will see is Holly White asked them to measure every single time two people bumped into each other or collided or had a conversation that lasted for more than 2 minutes. And each dot represents one of these encounters, quite quickly you'll see that these encounters occur in two very significant places. The first is right outside the front door of the store. And if you can imagine that if you were the store owner, the last thing you wanted was people clogging up the entrance, people coming in and out. In fact, the majority of the encounters actually occurred on the street corner itself, the place where two streets met. So much of the story of the city over the last century or so has been about the structure of the city. And so you can imagine that if you were an architect or a town planner, the last thing that you would want was this congestion here on the street corner. If you wanted to see the city as a flow of information, again, this blockage would be a real problem to your idea of the city as an optimized and efficient place. However, what I would argue that was in fact it's this street corner, this gentle chaos, these collisions and this congestion that really matters. This is where you find the soul and the spirit of the city. So what do I mean by that? What are these characteristics? And who is the city for? I need to tell this story. I need to return to Jan Gehl. He became famous pretty much at the same time as Holly White, transforming a section of Copenhagen called Strøget. At the time, the locals were very much against this project. They said, "We're Danish, we're not Italian, we don't do this." And yet, within a matter of months, this place, this open public place, became one of the most popular places in the city. And so Jan Gehl wanted to find out why people were coming to this place. So he watched them. He watched as they stood outside shops. He watched them as they checked to see what was at the cinema. And the two places that he found that they were most interested in was one outside a building site, and secondly, in front of street performers. And what Jan Gehl concluded, I think, was so simple and yet so important about the nature of the city. He concluded that people come here because they want to be with each other. That people come to the city because they want to be with other people. And it is this simple truth, I think, that is so obvious and so clear when we think about what happens when we come together. And this is exactly what Jane Jacobs, the iconic American urbanist, thought when she wrote her extraordinary book, The Death and Life of American Cities. In that book, she stood outside her house at 555 Hudson Street in the Greenwich Village and just watched an ordinary day as it passed in front of her. And what she saw from the very first moment, the shops open to the lunchtime crowd, to the children playing in the street, and then to the final muffled police sirens at the end of the day, is that something happened when people came together, when individuals interwove their lives, even on an ordinary city street. This is what Jane Jacobs calls the ballet of a good city sidewalk. And what she means is that, in fact, we become more than the sum of our parts when we come to public spaces like the street corner. But there are other things that occur when we come to this space. In a recent study that was done in the UK, taking 3 different parts of the country, the first, a marketplace in the East End of London, the second, a new town in Cambridge, and the third, a collection of fairly wealthy villages in the southwest, in a study to see which was the politest and the most civil place. They found, in fact, that it was in the East End marketplace, this place where almost 1 in 3 were below the poverty line, that there were huge social problems, that there was potentially every morning 60 languages being spoken in this place. But it was in this urban place where people were learning to be together, learning how to get along, that one found the highest level of politeness or civility. So coming to these public spaces, not only do we become more than the sum of our parts, but we learn the rules of being good citizens. And I would say it's the only place where we can learn the rules of being a good citizen. But there is another characteristic which is perhaps even more important in our day and age. in those gentle collisions that we saw on that street corner outside Saks Fifth Avenue. This is where we find the creativity of the city. This is where we find a place where good ideas come from. Now, I was traveling last week through Silicon Valley, and what I found there was fascinating in that they have taken, in their office design and in the way that they've created their campuses, very much that spirit of the street corner and turned it into their office spaces. So you will imagine that, for example, Facebook have now created a brand new office space which is over a kilometre in size, and this is to enhance and encourage people to bump into each other. Just this week, Google has launched a sidewalk lab, a way of thinking about the city and technology, but using that spirit of the street corner. Ideas do not come about by people going off on their own. They come about through people bumping into each other. And this is what's so important about a good city corner. And yet, despite the fact that we are learning these characteristics and these qualities, the city street corner is under threat. So what are the strategies? What are the tactics that we can use in order to enhance and to ensure that our cities are being built with a social urbanism in mind? For me, it starts off with that very, very simple question. It's a simple question, but is also incredibly profound. Who is the city for? We see that our street corners are becoming increasingly privatized. They're being handed over from the public into the private, and this really does jeopardize all those qualities that we've seen. It jeopardizes the idea that the city and its public spaces is a commonwealth, and when we share these places and when we come together, this is how we learn to be good citizens. This is where we learn to be creative. Another thing that is threatening those values and a social urbanism is inequality, and our cities are becoming increasingly unequal. But inequality creates a geography of difference. It creates places where you're not allowed to go, or it creates places where different types of behavior are encouraged or banned. Perhaps the most dangerous thing that inequality brings to the city is the loss of trust. And trust is the one thing that brings the city together. Trust is the only thing we can really learn from being on that street corner. There is no other place where we can learn these tools of being social urbanists. And so, when returning to that question, who is the city for? We have to think about the right of the city for all. Because if the city is not for everybody, then it's no good at all. And so when we ask, who is the city for? We have to start with this question and then build the city around it. Thank you.